The first thing you can do, for me, is throw your medals in the bin. You've never won anything fairly. You've done it all by cheating. Day one, new job, and that is how he introduced himself. The men he said that to were the reigning champions of England, Billy Bremner, Johnny Giles, Norman Hunter, whose nickname was Bites Your Legs, and it was not ironic. Men who had bled for those medals for 13 years. That's right, today we're going to be talking about Brian Clough and his famous tenure at Leeds United. So stick around, because what happened next is probably one of the most remarkable stories in football history, and it does not end where you think it does. What he said to those players on that day is probably one of the most audacious things anyone has ever said in a football dressing room, or even the most stupid, and probably both. I mean, who does that? Who walks into a room full of hard men who just won the league on day one and tells them to throw their medals away? Brian Clough, that's who. Old Big Head. In 44 days he was gone, sacked by the club he had publicly called cheats for years, with the reigning champions sitting fourth from bottom of the league, and on the very same day they sacked him, ITV sat him down on live television with the man he replaced. Now, before we get to the 44 days, you need to understand who Brian Clough was. He wasn't just a manager, there was nobody like him, and there's never been nobody like him since. Opinionated, brilliant, completely infuriating, said what he thought about anyone at any time, genuinely did not care about the consequences. In 1974, managers did not do that. He was completely unique. When Clough arrived at Derby County in 1967, they were a second division club going nowhere. By 1972, he had won them the first division title, barely any money, no superstars, just Clough. That is the equivalent of taking a championship club today and winning the Premier League. This is what he'd done before he even walked through the door at Leeds. He was not modest about it. He once said, "I wouldn't say I'm the best manager in the business, but I'm in the top one." The difference between arrogance and confidence is whether you can back it up. Clough could back it up. But he had one problem. He could not stop his mouth. His greatest strength, total self-belief, absolute refusal to back down. It was also the thing that was about to destroy him. Keep that in mind for everything that follows. To understand what Clough was walking into, you need to understand Don Revie's Leeds. Revie had been there since 1961. 13 years, 2 league titles, FA Cup, League Cup, 2 European trophies. He did just not win things, he built an identity around that club that those players would have died for. As mentioned before, Bremner, Giles, Hunter, these were not soft men. Billy Bremner was captain, Scottish, ferocious, would not back down from anyone. Johnny Giles was the midfield brain, technically brilliant, not someone you wanted to cross, and Norman Hunter's nickname was Bites Your Legs. It wasn't ironic, it was a description. Now, while he was at Derby, Clough had spent years publicly calling Leeds the dirtiest, most cynical team in the league, said they should have been relegated over their disciplinary record, said they won by cheating. Every player in that dressing room had heard him say it. In interviews, on television, in the press, they knew exactly what he thought of them. Then in the summer of 1974, Revie was appointed England manager. Huge moment for the country, devastating for Leeds. The man who had built everything they were was gone. They needed someone to continue what he had started, so the board appointed Brian Clough, the man who had spent years publicly calling their players cheats. What could go wrong? Now, there is one detail about this appointment that changes everything. Peter Taylor, Clough's right-hand man, his partner since Hartlepool in the 1960s, refused to come. Now, Taylor was the one who spotted players, handled relationships, and kept Clough grounded when his mouth got ahead of him. He was the reason Clough worked, and he stayed at Brighton. Every time Clough had succeeded, Taylor had been next to him. Derby, Taylor was there. He had never managed a big club without him, not once. So Clough went to Leeds alone, no ally, no buffer, nobody to tell him when to stop. He arrived 10 days before the season started. Leeds fans did not want him, the players did not want him, half the board had voted against the appointment. He walked in anyway, like he owned the place, and that is why people are still talking about him 50 years later. So now you know who is in that room. Bremner, Giles, Hunter, men who had bled for 13 years to win those medals, and Clough stood in front of them on day one and told them to throw their medals in the bin because they had cheated to win them. The dressing room was gone before he finished the sentence. So on to the first training session. Clough introduced a small-sided game. Bremner looked at him and told him straight, "We have never done that under Revie." Not difficult for the sake of it, he was the captain of the reigning champions, telling the new manager his methods were not what Leeds did. A completely reasonable thing to say. Clough's response was to threaten punishment to anyone who mentioned Revie's name again. In a room full of men who had won everything under Revie, who loved Revie, who had just lost Revie. That was his response to the first sign of resistance. Peter Lorimer had already decided before Clough arrived. Clough had been publicly criticising him at a local award ceremony before he even had the job. Lorimer knew, the squad knew, there was no goodwill left to spend. Clough had spent it all before he even walked through the door. Within days of arriving, Clough found threatening letters in his office at Ellen Road. Death threats, not from rival fans, from Leeds. That tells you everything about the atmosphere he was operating in. The results were not good. 1 win from 6 league games, lost to Liverpool in the Charity Shield at Wembley, knocked out of the European Cup by Bayern Munich. Leeds had been the best team in England the season before. After 6 games, Leeds were 19th in the First Division, 4th from bottom. The reigning champions of England were 4th from the bottom of the league. This is not a bad run, this is a total collapse. One Leeds fan, interviewed 50 years later, said they thought they would never be able to follow Leeds again. This is what those 44 days felt like from the terraces. And through it all, the death threats, the results, the dressing room, the board, Clough had no one. Taylor was in Brighton. He faced every single problem completely alone. Here is my take. Clough was drowning and he refused to admit the water was rising. Every time he had options, he chose the hardest one. Every time he could have backed down, he went further forward. You can admire that, it still did not work. And that brings us to September 12th, 1974. 44 days, gone. He was paid £98,000 in compensation, his full contract, paid in full. In 1974, that was serious money. He walked away with it. That was the only clean part of this whole episode. On the same day he was sacked, ITV broadcast a special programme called Goodbye Mr Clough. They put Brian Clough, just sacked, fresh out of the building, in a room with Don Revie, the man he had replaced and publicly despised, and let them go at each other for 25 minutes on live television. The presenter basically sat back and watched. Even on the day he was sacked, sitting on television, having just been humiliated, Clough could not stop. He told Revie his Leeds team had been so dirty they should have been relegated over their disciplinary record. Still swinging, still absolutely certain he was right, still refusing to back down. You can call that many things. Stupid is one of them, magnificent is another. That interview has nearly 2 million views on YouTube today, 50 years later. Some things do not age because the people in them are just that compelling. In his autobiography, Clough called Leeds the biggest mistake of his life, admitted he had underestimated the bond between Revie and his players. For a man who never admitted he was wrong about anything, that tells you how badly Leeds had broken him. 4 years later, Clough's Nottingham Forest won the European Cup, a club that had been in the second division when he arrived. Took them from nothing to the biggest prize in European football in 4 years. Then won it again the following year, back-to-back European Cups with Nottingham Forest, the club he managed after the club that sacked him after 44 days. Leeds, meanwhile, were knocked out of the same European Cup by Bayern Munich under Clough in the second round. Clough had a line about it. He said, "Did I say European Cup? I hardly lasted long enough to be given my own teacup at Leeds." So all in all, we could say Clough was kind of a genius who walked into an impossible situation. Think about what he was handed. Taylor had refused to come, the board was split, the players were furious before he arrived, the fans didn't want him, and any manager would have struggled in that environment. Maybe the 44 days were always going to end this way regardless of what he did. Or did he burn it down himself? He called them cheats before he arrived, told them to throw their medals away on day one, banned them from mentioning Revie, had death threats and a dressing room in open revolt, and still kept going the same way. He had options, but he chose the hardest one every single time. Now here is the question I keep coming back to. Every time Clough had Taylor beside him, he succeeded. The one time he went without Taylor, he failed completely. Was Taylor's absence the real reason it fell apart? Or did Clough walk in and destroy it himself before Taylor could have made any difference? One of these answers changes everything. My lean, and I'm happy to be argued out of it, is that it was both. Clough without Taylor was always going to be volatile, but Leeds was a specific kind of impossible that even Taylor might not have survived. The man was extraordinary. Leeds was just the one thing he could not charm, bully or talk his way through. Leave your answer in the comments. I want to know which side you come down on. And if you've not seen the ITV interview, Clough and Revie, the day he was sacked, go and find it on YouTube. Nearly 2 million people already have. If you enjoyed the video today, there's going to be more to come. So, you know, like, subscribe, comment, hit the bell, ding-a-ding-ding-ding-dong. Thank you.